spend all sorts of time on all these features on your site. You're trying to build demand and get people to interact and all this stuff. But like, pay attention to the thing that actually converts people into customers, because all of this A/B testing and incremental improvements that you make, they pay off in such a huge way. And I was like, wow, that was very good advice. And I, go into work the next day and I find out that we have like a little upsell in one of our major kind of offerings that wasn't working. And that was like the answer to why we were so far down in the count for, customers coming from this thing. And I was like, oh my God, we've spent so much time like adding new features and content and all this stuff. It's like, you got to pay attention to the upsell.
Welcome to What If, So What, the podcast where we explore what's possible with digital and discover how to make it real in your business. I'm your host, Jim Hertzfeld, and we get shit done by asking digital leaders the right questions. What if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Hey, I'm really excited to be here with Todd Unger. He's the Chief Experience Officer of the American Medical Association and the author of The 10-Second Customer Journey, a book about really for the CXO. In fact, it's the CXO's playbook for growing and retaining customers in a digital world. That's what we're here for. That's what we all want to know. Todd, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here today.
So Todd, just quick background, maybe a little bit about your role, but then I'd love to ask people like, what got you here? And you have a great backstory. So maybe you could just give the folks where a little background on where you're coming from and what you do with the AMA.
Yeah, I will tell you, first off, I never thought of or aimed to be a chief experience officer. In fact, if you had asked me what that was 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. But my background really is in a few different places that have added up to what I think experience is today. I started out in classic marketing and advertising. I worked for Procter & Gamble. I worked for a big ad agency, Leo Burnett. And then I jumped in the late 90s into the digital world. I worked for America Online, as it was used to be called, and a bunch of other kind of New York-based media companies where I learned about kind of content development and product management. It was really my kind of initial foray into that. Ran a bunch of websites. And the last thing I did before I came to the AMA was I was in horse racing, where I really started to get into the combination of digital content and commerce. I helped build a betting platform and selling premium content and data and all that kind of stuff. And although it sounds very far away from medicine and healthcare, kind of under the hood type of activities are very much the same of what I do as a chief experience officer today.
Well, I think that broad perspective is important for any experience because it may not be obvious to everyone, but customer experience, wherever you are, whatever business you're in, is an online and offline or an omni-channel venture. And so that diversity of thought, I think, is really important. In fact, I think a lot of brands look for that, right? They're looking to go and undergo some sort of transformation. They're going to look outside of what they're used to.
Yeah. I wonder, they did specifically at the AMA. They knew I didn't have any healthcare background or anything like that. But when I think back about like in my career and what, say at Procter & Gamble, where they kind of moved you around a lot and you had to take a turn at sales. And I don't think they really do that widely anymore. And so when you think about the skill set into getting to building experience, like finding people like that in the pipeline, it's a challenge that have experience across all those components.
Yeah, I think you're right. I know when I was coming up in my career, it seemed like all the large corporations, you knew you were going to go into a 2-year rotation every time. And I with my clients, I don't see that as much as I used to, but I do think that gives you an appreciation for a lot of different things. It just makes you a better professional. So you've gone through a lot. And what would you say and has sort of changed the most? Like what's sort of changed in the world that, and in particular, has brought us to a world, like you said, you never expected, around being responsible for your customer's experience?
I'd say, and I'm not going to say AI right off the bat, which is what I think everybody would.
Thank you. This is an AI free zone.
Okay. But it will figure into, I think, probably what we talk about, but especially compared to when I first entered the world of marketing, much more one-dimensional and especially slow. And so I think the biggest thing that has changed today is the speed with which people make and execute buying decisions. It is a totally different paradigm than the one I learned about when I was coming up through marketing. And so having layered on these additional parts of my career in digital media and commerce has really changed me in terms of how I think about my job and what I do.
Yeah, there's a lot of nostalgia in there, Todd, right? Like,
Good word.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like it's back to school season now, right? And there's brands that plan all year for back to school.
Yeah.
And you really just can't do that anymore because you have to be pretty responsive. I was just thinking like, okay, what do I do with the Olympics? And, I know the convention is happening. We were just talking about that and how the weather's changing. All these things are factoring into really journey steps along the way.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. So in the AMA in particular, why does this decisioning matter and the speed matter?
Yeah, I think it applies to any business, any operation out there where you're trying to get more members or more customers. You just have to accept that the way that decision making happens right now on the other end of that is fundamentally different than it used to be. And that change, along with just the serendipity of being named a chief experience officer, really challenged, I'd think, my own identity as I would have considered myself a marketer or a digital marketer or a digital person in the past. And to embrace this paradigm of experience, which I found to be needing to be updated, let's say, for the digital world, and really caused me to rethink kind of my role. And what I talk about, and we'll talk more in the book, is just the orchestration of the elements of experience, product, marketing, commerce, and service, and how in the customer's minds, they all go together. They're just one thing, whether that's digital or in retail and in-store, whatever environment. They don't care what department it is. They just want an easy experience with getting done what they want.
Well, that reminds me of a phrase I remember hearing or using a lot. Don't make your customer interact with the channel. They just want to interact with the brand, right? So I think one of the things that we can all relate to as consumers is the need for that. But we don't always apply that professionally. The formula seems easy. It sounds easy. And you've done a great job at kind of simplifying this. So we're going to get to that in a second. But why do you think this is so challenging for organizations, for institutions today?
Yeah, it's literally structural because organizations are not set up to have a seamless experience internally between those four pillars of experience. They all sit in different places and report into different people. And a lot of the, early pioneering work done in experience, I think, points out the problem. There's a famous kind of person in experience, Bruce Temkin, that says a lot of experience problems are like, they're in between. They're in between different parts of your organizations. They're in between different parts of like the customer's journey. And literally nobody owns those in between places.
Yeah.
And yet we're so focused, especially like I would have said in my earlier days of marketing, to treat it like a marketing problem where there's somebody on the other end of it that's treating it as a customer service problem, or is it a product problem or a technology problem? It's like nobody cares. They just want to get through it.
Yeah.
So there just literally isn't normally somebody in an organization that has the purview and the motivation and oversight and sometimes authority to unify those streams of work. And that's a hard job.
Yeah. Sort of. Sometimes I call that like you're either gluing things together or you're putting varnish on something, right? Or polyurethane, right? It's like,
people talk all the time about silos and stuff like that. It's like, it's so old. Like you just want to, and the unhappiness with which every organization I've ever worked in my whole life, like you have these same kind of activities where they're just not together. It's so easy for portions of an organization to get out of whack because they're not focused on the customer.
Right. No, that's good. I mean, and probably and one of the hardest things to solve, right? And of course it comes back to humanity and how organizational dynamics and you mentioned motivation, right? Communication, some fundamentals, things we've heard before. Here's a kind of a random question. Is there a disconnect? Yeah, there are organizational disconnects, but do you think that there are, let's say, different perceptions within the organization about or degrees in which we buy into this customer centricity? Do you think there are leaders out there who are still not ready for the customer centric world?
Absolutely. And there's so many definitions even around like the term customer experience. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because people can't even agree on what that is. But I think there's one thing that everybody agrees on: growth. And so, when I started this job, my very specific kind of marching orders were to grow membership. And I looked at it that way and broadened kind of my purview over what it took to drive those things, all the different levers. But a lot of people in the world out there are focused on more intermediate measures or customer experiences, of just like in the old days of like digital transformation, like the big highfalutin term and other terms that are intermediary. Everybody wants to grow. Everybody's got to build customers, build revenue. And so if you can unify the operation around that and all the different parts of it and how they contribute to that, that's kind of where the action is. Everybody's going to be motivated by different things and has different skills they bring to the table. But it's really at that strategic level where the power can be in terms of bringing the process together. That's a good one. Growth. I like that you immediately juxtaposed, membership maybe versus revenue, because I think people's minds usually go to revenue. I've worked with manufacturers, or in particular, they kind of stand out. Sometimes the only number they care about is the opposite of growth, meaning how do we take cost out of the business, right? That's another one, maybe another way of saying the same thing. But I really enjoyed the book, Todd. And one of the things I liked about it is it's, don't mean this to come across the wrong way, but it's short and readable. And what I like about that is, I had time to read it and I'm intrigued by the stories. And I always love to hear other people's perspectives because I learn a few things, but I also sort of validate things that I think I already know. I'm like, Todd agrees with me. This is good. I found some, and you found a really good way of putting things. But I thought as I was reading through it, I need 10 copies of this because. And I think you do need 10 copies. Maybe 100 copies, because it's something that I could put in front of a client, a prospect, to say, hey, are you, if you weren't really sure about what it meant to be customer centric or adopt a customer experience program or mindset, you were unsure about why or how to do it, this is a great it's a great approach. It's a great start. And I think you did a great job at, taking your learnings, but making them accessible to others who maybe had lived in their own silo, their silo, their part of this equation. And I thought, wow, if I could really kind of get somebody a primer, before I was able to do anything else with them as a consultant, this might be the way to do it. So thank you for writing the book. And I really mean that sincerely. It was really well put together. Now you just needed like a photo part in the middle, like the old books. I need more pictures. I know. Yeah, I need more pictures. Now I noticed that as a thing. Here's a suggestion for the second edition. A graphic novel. That might be kind of cool. That's a lot that goes into it. But I've seen books have second editions with a graphic novel. So you just kind of read it like a comic strip. So tell you, and it's unfortunate because we had our annual customer experience forum at the AMA and my customer experience director did something so cool. We have about 40 or 50 different kind of leads on projects that are all across the hundreds of people working on customer experience issues at AMA. And she made a personalized sign for each one of them about what they did. And they all, we have this one picture of all of them holding up their signs. And I was like, this is like bringing tears to my eyes. And I wish I'd had that picture to put in the book, but it shows how you can catalyze an organization and how you scale a CX operation. It's not through the team only. It's through the whole group of people that are stakeholders in this. That is one of the coolest things. I remember you did show that to me. We've got to share that for the audience here because that was powerful. But those are little things, tangible things that make a difference. I was actually with a software partner this week, and we were asking them what can we do to bring our customer client story back to you? And they said they almost said the same thing. Give us use cases. Give us. I was able to do this. I stopped doing that. I was able to offer my customer this. So those little bits I think are really important because they're tangible. Yeah, they're tangible. So, well, you talk about a few other things and then many techniques, but a couple of them really stood out to me. I just wanted to kind of get your take on them. So I've read it, I went through it, and I thought these are things that little bits I'm going to start sharing with people right away. The first one that you talked about was fix your checkout page, right?
FYCOP.
Yeah.
And a couple things that I really liked about it. One is you talk about experimentation, which I love experimentation, A/B testing. Try something out, try out something small, see how it works out, see what you learn from it, test and learn. It has a few other monikers. And you tell a story about, sort of challenging a team. I think it was a developer who was trying to improve conversion. They made this change and it was 7%. And then somebody else built on it and conversion was improved by, I think, like 10 or 11%. And just the power of those small changes, trial and error, it sounds like, but it's not. It's thoughtful. It's a hypothesis. You experiment, right? You test it and it comes back. But the thing I really liked about it is, you made a point that these details matter and you can make incremental change. You don't have to be overwhelmed. And it's not just the checkout experience. It could be an online form or a CTA. It could be, how you walk into a waiting room or how you order coffee, at a coffee shop. I mean, am I thinking about this the right way? This is not just about checkout pages, right? This is about incremental changes. I want to make sure I'm reading that right,
yeah.
Todd.
In fact, that the story and that acronym or hashtag or whatever you want to call it was inspired by a dinner that I had with the co-founders of Stripe, the brothers John and Patrick Collison. And I don't know how I got invited to this dinner, but at the end of it was a question and answer session. And I asked, what would you do to eliminate customer friction for my book? I'm looking for something for my book. And Patrick said, fix your checkout page. And as you might expect someone from Stripe to say, but the way that he told the story was so compelling and simple, which is like you spent all sorts of time on all these features on your site. You're trying to build demand and get people to interact on this stuff, but pay attention to the thing that actually converts people into customers, because all of this A/B testing and incremental improvements that you make, they pay off in such a huge way. And I was like, wow, that was very good advice. And I, go into work the next day and I find out that we have like a little upsell in one of our major kind of offerings that wasn't working. And that was like the answer to why we were so far down in the count for, customers coming from this thing. And I was like, oh my God, we've spent so much time like adding new features and content and all this stuff. It's like, you got to pay attention to the upsell. And so I talked to my team about it. It's like, it's not just fix your checkout page. It's every page that there is a huge conversion metric that rides on that. You better make sure it's working and that you're improving it all the time. Every effort you make to do that pays off, literally.
Well, and it's kind of reminds me of some other old rules, the 80-20 rule, right? I mean, you really have to kind of figure out what matters the most, right? So maybe we're saying two things, like the details matter, but you got to know which details matter.
Absolutely.
Most, right?
Yeah, don't take your eye off of all of that.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was good. And I immediately started thinking about all the incremental improvements, we could make. But you mentioned measurement. That was kind of the second thing that stuck out to me in terms of different tactics and techniques. And, you mentioned Temkin. I remember years ago, maybe they're still doing there's kind of a customer index score. I think the Temkin score. We have a similar approach we call CXIQ, but this kind of inspired me because about some other measurements to sort of evaluate maybe not how you're doing, but at the end, does the experience itself working, right? Yep. And only the customer can kind of define that. It's at some point. But you talked about the customer effort score, just sort of, how much work they have to put in, what's the friction score, what's pushing against them. You talked about first contact resolution. So if there's an issue, does it get resolved the first time? You talk about channel switching, it sort of has little echoes of omni-channel, can do how, and this is everybody's, favorite story. Well, I tried to do this but now I have to call and, I'm going to wait, in a queue forever or, the cloud. Now the one you hear all the time, I'm trying to cancel my account. There's no way to do it. There is no number, all that sort of by design, but maybe shed a little light on measurement because, I think that's, one of the sort of great eye openers, right? Is to see, we have our gut feel and we have our experience, but what do the numbers have to say? So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on kind of where you're going with measurement.
Yeah, it really is. It's such an important piece of this, the whole metric situation, but especially in the book, what I talk about are the different ways that we look at customer experience. And then I think there are some basic customer service metrics that you employ there too. I mean, you've got your measures around customer effort that are pretty standard. You go into the bathroom at O'Hare, it said, how easy was it to use it? You've got those kinds of things. I think the biggest change for us is in the customer friction index that we've created, which is really simple, which is basically like how many problems are people having out of how many sessions are on this. And so that just kind of gives you a general idea of like, what's my friction score on that thing? And you can track that over time, and you can monitor for when that goes outside of normal parameters that might indicate a problem. And I think the biggest change that we've made in terms is like what gets input into the numerator of that particular equation has changed for us. It used to just be, people that contacted our service center, either by, whatever channel it was, chat, email, or phone call. And then we would track those things, and then we would see all the sessions and we would count that. But we've since put in a more automated solution onto the site and throughout all our products. We use something called Quantum Metric that actually automates the collection of that, and using certain signals on the site, like, oh, there's a button being hit and nothing's happening. And that's my favorite one, a rage click, as we might call it. It's like you push in the elevator and it's just not coming any faster, or if at all. And so that kind of sends up a red flag.
Yeah.
And you get the signal, and someone can go fix that. Now, there are two things about it. One is like, that's the kind of thing that could go on forever and you don't know about it. That's my nightmare, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other thing is it does broaden the amount of instances that are going to go into that numerator. So it can be pretty depressing if all of a sudden your collection has gone beyond the manual world. Now you're in automated machine learning type solutions. But boy, does it make a huge difference to know, track, and improve. And so that's really the key there for us.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, and again, I just love your attention to these details, and focusing on the right things. Rage click is something I haven't heard in a while. So
it's a great term, and everyone knows what it means.
It is. Yeah, you bet everyone knows. The elevator is a little more tangible. Like, God, I'm late. I guess finally then you spend a little bit of time on this, or a few pages on this. And I think this comes up a lot. And you mentioned sort of the in-betweenness of this all, sort of there's sort of a twilight zone or no man's land or demilitarized zone, right? That's where these roles sort of happen. But you talk about different organizations. You talk about, and I've seen every variety of this, and I think everybody is wondering where this CXO function lives, right? And you list a few options, sort of combinations. Is it a standalone unit? It's just, this is the CX team. I see that a lot. Is it in marketing, which seems to be sort of the default? I don't know why. I guess because maybe that's where someone wrote a persona once. Operations, which is interesting. Because I think I see that a lot in call center. I think if you look at sort of older books about customer experience, they seem to be contact center, call center oriented.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way, outside of sales, that's kind of where it happened. Or, you talk about sort of an enterprise COE. That's another model where, gosh, we kind of acknowledge that it's everybody's responsibility, but we're not really, if we just put this on Todd's plate, then like no one else will feel accountable to it. Right. And then you have sort of the office of the CXO. And this is saying, hey, we're taking this to the next level. I think you nailed all the combinations, but what do and you kind of allude to different debates in LinkedIn. I think
they're very passionate about this particular
they are.
topic,
They are. I always love a good Reddit debate myself, just because it seems a little spicier. But yeah, so since you've written that, what do you do you have any kind of thoughts or advice for people in terms of, because again, they're going to read this, they're going to buy into it, but then now what? Like, how do we make it work if I don't feel like it's working in my organization yet?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things I'd love to tell you is kind of the origin story of my customer experience journey. And it really began because I have customer service as part of my team. And a thing that I noticed was just the volume of calls they were getting in with people unable to log into our site for whatever reasons. And they did a great job of fixing every one of these problems on the spot and getting somebody on the way. But it just kept happening every day. And I finally looked at the person that was running customer service and I'm like, you know what? we actually need to fix this problem.
Yeah.
And the reason that like CX has a hard time if it's centered in customer service is because they don't have the authority necessarily to reach out across the organization and involve all the people who need to fix this problem. This is a classic case of the in-between, where this problem involves 50,000 players across every part of the organization, from mine to product, IT to commerce to service, you name it, it runs the gamut. And there's no one to step in and say, I'm going to pull the players here together. We're going to figure out how to identify what this problem looks like, how to measure it, and how all the things that goes into fixing it. That kicked off our customer experience journey and the need to begin a CX operation. And so we started that CX operation in the marketing group because that's what I run. But as we matured as an organization, we turned it into a center of excellence for the rest of the organization, where we are kind of on loan to help people bust down those problems that create friction. And so I think that kind of center of excellence housed within marketing works for a lot of reasons on growth. And there is alignment between marketing initiatives and CX initiatives, because on its own, CX initiatives, like, they're tough to fund. And so that's why we don't talk about them. I just build that into my growth plan and we fund those initiatives through that. And then the other thing is, like, they're operational. Like, this is not like for the faint of heart, right? You got to roll up your sleeves and get in there. And so I think a lot of these things that are housed at, like, Office of Customer Experience and the C-suite, they're very highfalutin things. They're not the day-to-day problems that people experience in their journeys that prevent growth. And that's really what our team is about.
That's great. I love calling back to growth, and which goes back to measurement, and going back to sort of rolling up your sleeve. I'm going back to, fix your checkout page. Like, that's kind of roll up your sleeve stuff. Like, what does it matter? So yeah, I love it. So you have a lot more in the book, Todd, and I really mean it. Like, I'm getting more copies because, it's like, I want to meet my next customer and say, okay, before we come back and, like, really, really, really get into, a solution, you need to buy into this. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate that too. Thank you so much. Of all the things that, like, are meaningful as an author, it's feedback like that, where somebody comes back and says, like, I learned something and I put it to use. So
definitely. Yeah. Well, then, so thanks for writing and thanks for joining the podcast, Todd.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me today. It was really fun.
You've been listening to What If, So What, a digital strategy podcast from Proficient with Jim Hertzfeld. We want to thank our Proficient colleagues J.D. Norman and Rick Bauer for our music. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at proficient.com. Thanks for listening.